Good morning, everyone. My name is Ishita. I am the organizer for the webinar, and our presenter today is Adarsh. Our topic for our webinar is Microsoft Dynamics D365 Business Central API and its best practices. So I'll take few minutes out of your time and would like to introduce our company, and then we can move ahead with our webinar. So we are Dynamic Stars, a sister concern company of the consulting services. We are new and improved version of Center of Excellence, and we have been working with Microsoft partners over the world and have been working with over 45 plus Microsoft partners currently. We cater our partners throughout Microsoft D365 ecosystem. Our services include Microsoft D365, Power Platform, and technology solutions. Under Dynamic Stars, we are a partner centric company. We aim to be partners and not competitors. We only work with Microsoft partners. We aim to be one stop solutions for our Microsoft partners throughout the 365 ecosystem. Currently, we have worked with partners located in 18 different countries. The D365 products that we work with includes D365 Business Central, finance, supply chain management, e-commerce, human resource. The CRM solutions that we work with includes D365 sales, marketing, field service, and customer service. Apart from D365 products, we also work with Power Platform that includes Power Automate, Power BI, Power Apps, Power Portals, Power Virtual Agents, Microsoft Dataverse, Azure, and Lifecycle Services. The D365 services that we work with includes D365 Enterprise implementation, that is end-to-end implementation. We have also done various rapid implementations as well. We have developed a methodology wherein we implement D365 Business Central out of the box solutions in 15 working days. We also provide support services that include solutions and backend support along with dedicated allocation as well. We help our partners with add-on development services that includes research and development for add-ons, providing support for add-ons, and if and when custom add-on development for their clients. We have also done various upgrades and system re-engineering, wherein we have helped our partners with upgradations from older Dynamics products to the new one. We have done various migrations. That also includes re-implementation as well. We have done the other services that we provide is integration services. That could be Power Apps, Power Portals, customer and vendor portals. We have done various EDI integrations for e-commerce client, machine integrations, and much more. We also do developments of reports and dashboards through BI capabilities. So that is just a brief understanding of our services and the products that we work with. So thank you so much for your time. I would like to introduce Adarsh again, and we could start with our webinar.
Thank you, Ishita. Good morning, everyone. My name is Adarsh Kol, and I will be presenting this webinar to you. Let me get started. So the topic for this webinar is Business Central APIs and best practices. So what is an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface. API is an interface that allows applications to interact with each other so they can exchange information. API can expose some of an application's inner data and functionality to be used by developers in software integrations. A basic API example could be a weather app on a phone. This API connects the phone app and meteorological site that exposes part of its database. When the phone app asks for data, the API interacts with the weather site, retrieves it, and provides the information to the phone app. Now let's move to Business Central Web Services, because in Business Central we use web services as APIs. So web services are lightweight industry standard way to make application functionality available to various external systems and users. The main difference between an API and a web service is that a web service is exclusively built to connect applications over a network, a resource that is available usually on the internet. Whereas an API can also work offline, for instance, a communication between two apps on same computer. All web services are APIs, but not all APIs are web services. In Business Central, we will always use online services. Developers can create and publish functionality as web services where they expose pages, code units, or queries, and it even enhances a page web service by using an extension code unit. When Business Central objects are published as web services, they are immediately available on network. There are two ways to expose Business Central data: OData or SOAP. Let's talk about some of the differences between OData and SOAP. SOAP only supports the XML format, whereas OData supports XML as well as JSON format. In Business Central, we can expose three types of objects: pages, code units, and queries. Depending on the type of web service we choose, they will be available to be published or not. Here are some differences. Pages we can create in SOAP and OData web services, where we can give permission like read, update, delete operations. Uh, Code units we can publish in both SOAP and OData web services, and queries we can only publish in OData web services. So let's move to our next topic, that is authentication versus basic authentication. So in order to connect APIs, there must be a type of authentication that allows them to interact business event contract. Business Central has two ways of authentication: basic authentication and O authentication. However, on cloud-based versions, basic authentication is depreciated with version BC20 onwards. Basic authentication is a way of authentication that is based on an active Business Central user and a password. This password is called Web Service Access Key, and it can have an expiration date. O authentication is usually via Azure Active Directory, a platform in which to register your app interface and credentials. In O authentication, we will have an app as the user and a token as a password. The example of this I will be showing to you later in this session. Now, how to create a simple API. In order to expose a page in Visual Studio Code, you can set the page type to API and fill in the properties related to it. When you publish the page along with the app, you can access it with an endpoint. The endpoint is just the URL that we use to connect to the API. Below is an example of the URL that is generated when we publish a web service in Business Central. On the right hand side, if you can see, that is an extension, a simple extension uh, which represents basically a customer page. An example of this we will be showing you in this session later. Now coming to the API best practices part. API pages are different from UI pages. They require different properties and don't behave the same. Because API pages are used for integration with external applications, they should be treated as contracts. To achieve this, the following topics are important: separate API app, page properties, versioning, field properties, default fields. So let's discuss it one by one. So first is separate API app. So it's good practice to develop API pages in a separate app instead of combining them in a solution. By doing so, it provides better maintainability and is a good way of separation of concerns. Page properties. An API page must define a minimum set of properties. Some of these properties will be part of the URL of the API endpoint. It is recommended to define the properties in the same order as they appear in the URL. The properties that must be defined are page type, that is equivalent to API. And for queries, there is a property query type, which you can give as API. API publisher. The name of API publisher is usually the company creating the API. It is the first custom part in the URL for a given endpoint. The value is case insensitive. API group. It sets the group of the API endpoint that page or query is exposed in. In the URL, the API group comes after the API publisher. It can be used to distinguish different API apps or groups of APIs from each other. The value is case insensitive. API version. It sets the versions of API endpoint the page or query is exposed in. This property is not mandatory. If it is not specified, then APIs will be exposed as beta. The API version can be set to beta or have the format VXY, which is version 1.0, version 2.0, like that. It is possible to expose an API in multiple versions. This allows to publish a new version of an API app without copying all the individual objects and updating the version numbers. Only those API objects that are changed in a new version need to be copied. The other properties only need an addition to the API version property to become available in the
Others,
new version endpoint.
sorry to cut you off. Is it possible if you could reshare your screen?
Okay. Is it visible?
It is visible to me. Are the guests able to see? Yes. We can continue, others. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So let me just quickly go where we left. Okay. So we discussed API versions. Now comes entity set name. The entity set name is the plural entity name. Think of it as the name of the collection of entities. It is recommended to use camel casing for this property. The value is case sensitive. Entity name. The entity name sets the singular entity name for the API page or query. This name is not used in the URL. Instead, the entity name is used in the metadata information. It is recommended to use camel casing for this property. Delayed insert. This property is required on an editable API page. It does not apply to an API query object. If editable is false in API page, then delayed insert is not required. All API pages apply the behavior to first specify all field values and then insert the record at once. Or data key fields. The property OData key fields defines which fields will be used for the identifier value. It is highly recommended to always use the system ID field for this property. The system ID field is immutable and will never change for a record. The field that is defined in this property should be part of the API page. Now let's discuss field properties. There are no mandatory properties. The property application area does not play a role in API pages, so it can be skipped. The property caption is also optional and should only be used in case the external application requires captions, and the caption should be different from the standard caption. The name of the field should be defined in camel casing. It may not contain spaces, dots, or other special characters. Now coming to the mandatory fields. Uh, System ID is one of the mandatory fields. This field should be exposed with the name ID. Another field that is mandatory, system modified at. This field should be exposed with the name last modified date time. If you choose a different name, then the webhook functionality will not work properly. Thank you. So now let me just quickly show you uh, regarding what we discussed. So in this now we will see how to create publish a simple API page and how to create authentication in Azure portal and use that to access the API page. So as you can see, I have already opened Business Central. And let me just open the extension. So I have already created one extension here, the same that we discussed in the slides. Uh, I have created one page customer list test with source table as customer and have defined the properties as we discussed. And the fields that I have taken in this page is system ID, number, name, and balance. So this extension I have already published in Business Central. So it is published as BC API 1. So after doing this, the first step will be to go to web services page where we will publish this page for access to the outside world. So page ID is 50,100. And here we select publish. We give a service name and we select publish. After selecting publish, a link is generated, one for OData URL and another for SOAP URL. These serve as our endpoints as APIs that is used by the third party to fetch data. So let me just copy this link and paste it, save it for my use later. So now we have published an API in Business Central. So the next step is to create authentication because that is what we will is mostly used because it's not the earlier part was not is depreciated, it's being depreciated. where we use the web service key. So for O authentication, uh, we open Azure portal, and here we click on more services. Here you search for app registrations. You click on app registrations, click on new registration, give it some name. Select a platform, you select as web, and here you paste the Business Central link that is used to log into Business Central. So here I have pasted Business Central link, and now let me click on register. So the app is successfully registered. Now the next step is we click on API permissions and give some permissions. We click on add a permission. Then we click on Dynamics 365 Business Central. Here are two sets of permission, delegated permission and application permissions. So first, we assign delegated permission. Here, user impersonation and financials.readwrite.all. We add this permission, click on add permissions. So these permissions are added. Once they are added, we again click on add a permission and go to Business Central. This time we click on application permissions. Here we give app access permission, api.readwrite.all permissions, automation.readwrite.all permissions. And then we click on add permissions. So these permissions have been generated, but now we need to grant admin consent for this. And therefore we click on grant admin consent for Contoso. We click on yes. So if you can see now the status uh, has changed and it's now granted for Contoso. So it has now the admin consent. So after this, we go to certificates and secrets. Here we generate a new client secret. We give description, some description for it. Let me and in the another field, Microsoft has given us options, the time interval during which it will remain valid. So for now, I have chosen 6 months. I click on add. So a client secret has been created. So I would need this description later. So I am saving it on a notepad. I would need client secret value. So I am copying it, saving for future use. Also, we will need one more thing, that is an application client ID. So we copy it for use in later in the session. So now our part with Azure portal is done. So now the next step would be to generate a token in Postman and access this web service. So for that, you need to download Postman desktop. Here I have created one workspace, API webinar, and new collection. In this new collection, you can add a request by clicking on it. In the get window, you need to paste the URL that is generated from Business Central, which is our endpoint or API. We go to authorization. First, here we choose O authorization 2.0. We scroll down a little bit and first we write the token name. This is the name of the token that was generated. So I will write here. Fallback URL will be the Business Central URL that you use to access your Business Central. I'm checking if there are any spaces or not. Then authorization URL and token URL. So let me just copy this. So these are basically the URLs which we need to fill. And in this, you can see that there is one tenant ID. So we need to replace this keyword with the actual tenant ID of the Business Central. I have already copied the tenant ID. I am pasting it here and in the below URL as well. So in the authorization URL, I am putting this URL, and in the access token URL, I am putting the URL of the access token. These two URLs are basically the same, only the keywords change, authorize and token. So, okay, we scroll down. Next field is client ID. Here we put the application ID that we have copied earlier. And then in the client secret section, we paste the client secret value that was generated in Azure. Check for the spaces. After this is done, we click on get new access token. Here it will ask for your credentials. So I will click on mine and I need a password for it. So as you can see, it's showing that authentication is completed and it has generated an access token. Now we click on use token to use this token. So this token is now added here. And now let me just fetch data for this API. So as I now click on send, you can see that it is providing me values here, number, system ID, name, and balance. So it is now fetching customer data. Okay, so uh, this is what we wanted to show you, and this is it from my side. Thank you. If you have any questions, please write on chat. Thank you.